The air was damp, heavy with the scent of stone and dust. A single bulb swayed in the dark basement, casting fractured shadows across the cracked floor. In the corner, a baby's soft whimper echoed, fragile, uncertain, reaching out into a silence that felt endless. Beside the crib, chained to an iron loop in the wall, a German shepherd lifted his head. His ears twitched at every sound, his chest rising with the rhythm of a heartbeat too fast for calm. The dog's eyes locked on the child, and in that gaze burned something ancient, the instinct to protect, to guard, to sacrifice. The baby's hand slipped through the crib bars, fingers trembling toward the shepherd. The chain clattered as he shifted closer, pressing his nose against the tiny palm. In that contact, there was no language, no words, only a vow. Upstairs, a door creaked. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, danger was moving closer. The shepherd's muscles tightened, his body became a wall of silence, a shield forged in devotion. The bond had no choice now but to endure, or be broken forever. The morning light broke in fractured beams, through the narrow basement window, dust motes swirling like slow stars suspended in air too heavy for their weight. The silence here was not the silence of peace, but of confinement, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and seeped into breath. Yet within that stillness, two lives had begun to circle each other, building something wordless. The German shepherd was not young. His muzzle carried flecks of gray that cut through the deep brown, like frost on bark. His body bore the faint scars of fights unknown, lines etched into skin and fur that told of endurance more than aggression. He was chained, but not broken. His eyes amber, burning low like embers in a hearth, rarely left the crib. The baby was still learning the edges of existence. At 8 months, the world was a collage of textures and sounds. The rattle of metal against the floor when the shepherd shifted, the echo of water dripping from a pipe overhead, the softness of a blanket pulled close in the chill. The baby did not yet know fear in its full measure, but sensed unease, as if the air itself carried warnings. And yet, when the baby looked at the dog, there was calm. The first time the baby's tiny fingers had stretched through the crib's wooden bars and brushed against the shepherd's fur, the room seemed to exhale. The dog had not flinched. He had leaned into it, pressing his head against the fragile touch with a patience that spoke louder than any word. That was the moment their lifeline had been knotted. Day by day, the rhythm of their existence settled into something that felt unspoken but absolute. The shepherd would stand guard when the baby slept, ears swiveling at every creak of the house above. When hunger stirred cries from the crib, the dog would pace the chain's length, until the footsteps upstairs grew near. He hated those footsteps, their weight, their cadence, the sound of them dripping with indifference. But the baby's wails would soften when the shepherd pressed his nose against the bars, reminding him, "You are not alone." The baby in turn learned to reach. Fingers curled into the shepherd's fur became an anchor against the darkness. Even before words came, trust had already taken root. The dog's warmth, his steady breathing at night, became the baby's reassurance in a world too cold and unpredictable. There was no language here, only the communication of need and response, of vulnerability met with guardianship. It was not equal, yet it was mutual. The shepherd knew what it was to protect. The baby knew what it was to trust. Together, they became a single, silent unit, small against the weight of the basement, but stronger than either would have been alone. Above them, the world moved with cruelty they could not yet control. But here, in the dim light, there was something else. A bond carved not by choice, but by necessity, by survival, by the strange and fierce simplicity of love. And that bond was about to be tested. The night came heavy, pressing down on the basement like a weight. The thin bulb overhead sputtered and hummed, its glow trembling with each shift of current. The baby stirred in the crib, eyes fluttering open to the half-light, and the shepherd raised his head from the cold stone floor. Something was wrong. It was not the silence. They were used to silence. It was not the cold. They had both learned to endure it. It was the footsteps. He knew them before they even reached the door above. A shift in cadence, an edge of intent sharper than usual. Heavy, unforgiving. The shepherd's hackles rose in a ripple down his spine. His ears locked on the door, his body stiff, his chest full of air held tight against the instinct to growl. The baby whined softly, sensing it too. Small fingers gripped the blanket tighter, a sound escaping, not quite a cry, but the shepherd pressed his nose against the crib, low and steady, calming, reassuring. "I am here, stay still, Stay safe. The lock above turned with a metallic groan, hinges screamed, and the door flung wide. Light from the hallway cut through the basement like a blade. A shadow followed, long and jagged, spilling down the stairs. He descended. The shepherd forced himself between the crib and the sound of boots. The chain strained, rattling against iron, but he planted his paws firm against the floor. His teeth flashed in the dim light, lips pulled back just enough to warn. Not yet an attack, but a promise. The man's voice slashed through the still air, harsh, impatient. He cursed at the dog, at the noise, at the inconvenience of the crying child. The words themselves meant nothing to the baby, but their tone was fire and violence. The shepherd's chest rumbled low, vibrating the floor beneath his paws. The man moved closer, his shadow stretching long until it swallowed the crib whole. He reached, sudden and rough, for the baby. The shepherd lunged. The chain jerked taut with a violent crack, throwing him back mid-leap. His teeth clashed on air inches from the man's arm. The baby cried out now, sharp, terrified. The sound pierced the shepherd's ears, igniting every nerve. The chain tore at his neck, but he strained forward again, each lunge tearing skin beneath the collar. Blood mixed with fur, but his eyes never broke from the man's. The hand hovered over the crib, then pulled back. A shove of anger, a muttered curse, boots pounding retreat. The door slammed. Darkness swallowed the room again. The shepherd collapsed to the floor, chest heaving. The baby's cries softened into hiccups, then into a broken whimper. Slowly, painfully, the dog dragged himself back to the crib, blood spotting the stone where the chain had cut. He pressed his muzzle against the baby's hand once more. The baby clutched at his fur with desperate fingers, eyes wide, wet with fear. And in that touch, the shepherd swore it. Whatever storm was building above them, whatever break in the fragile order of this basement was coming, he would not let it take the child. Their bond had been silent until now, but tonight it had been tested. And from the crack in their fragile world, danger had seeped in. The break had come. The basement no longer felt still. Every corner of it carried the echo of the slammed door, the vibration of heavy boots, the sharp scent of blood left on the shepherd's collar. The baby slept only in fragments now, small sobs breaking the rhythm of breath. The shepherd lay close against the crib, body aching, eyes unblinking, listening to every creak of the house above. The chain was no longer just iron, it was a wound raw against his neck. Hours passed, each second stretched thin, until finally the silence broke again. A storm gathered in the sounds above. Drawers slammed, glass shattered, voices raised. The house had become chaos, and in chaos lived opportunity. The shepherd rose, muscles taut, breath slow. He pulled against the chain once more. It bit deep, cutting skin, but this time he did not stop. His chest expanded with every heave. Teeth clenched as he strained, paws sliding across the stone. The bolt in the wall groaned. Once, twice, a screech of metal. Then, with a crack that shook dust loose from the ceiling, the ring gave way. The shepherd staggered forward, dragging the torn chain behind him. He pressed his body against the crib. The baby's eyes opened, wide and wet, but calm when they met his gaze. He lowered his head, nudging gently, coaxing. The baby's tiny hands grasped his fur, fingers sinking into the thickness of it. The shepherd lowered further, until the child clung to his back. The climb began. The basement stairs were steep, each step groaning under his weight. The baby clung tight, breaths warm against his neck. The shepherd moved slow at first, ears straining for footsteps above. The air was sharper now, carrying the smell of smoke, acrid, invasive. Something upstairs was burning. At the top of the stairs, the door stood half open, light spilling through the crack. He pushed gently, muzzle pressing wood until the gap widened. Beyond lay a hallway cluttered with broken glass and overturned furniture. Flames licked from the far room, shadows writhing against the wall. The baby whimpered, the shepherd's ears flicked back. He pressed on. Each step through the house was a gauntlet. The floor was littered with shards, but his paws found paths through the wreckage. Smoke thickened the air, stinging eyes, forcing shallow breaths. The baby coughed and the sound twisted like a blade in the shepherd's chest. He quickened. A crash shook the house. Voices shouted, close now. Danger had not left. It prowled these halls still. The shepherd paused, listening. One voice, two, moving fast. He ducked low, slipping through the doorway into a shadowed corridor. His chest brushed against the wall. Baby pressed to his back, chain clinking softly behind. Every sound felt too loud, every movement like a flare in darkness. The exit was near. He could smell the air seeping in, cool, alive, filled with earth and damp grass. Freedom lay just beyond, but so did the voices. Boots pounded, closing in. A door slammed open behind. A shout cut through the smoke. The shepherd bolted. His muscles surged, every step driven by the weight on his back. The baby cried out, not in fear, but clinging tighter, trust unbroken even in the sprint. The back door loomed ahead, glass cracked but intact. He lowered his shoulder and crashed. Shards exploded outward, scattering into the night. The baby's cry rose with the sound, piercing, raw, alive. Cold air wrapped them at once. The world outside opened wide, dark tree, wet earth, the scent of rain on wind. Behind, the voices roared. The chase had only begun. The shepherd did not look back. His bond was forward, carrying him into the night, into the unknown, into the desperate pursuit of safety. The night was a tangle of branches and shadows. The shepherd's paws struck damp earth, throwing clumps of mud behind him as he cut through the tree. The baby clung tight, body pressed low against his fur, small fists locked into the thickness of his coat. Every stride carried both their weight, every breath burned his chest, but he did not falter. Behind them, the voices were not far. Shouts tore through the woods, jagged and violent, punctuated by the crack of branches and the sweep of flashlights cutting through darkness. The glow wavered in the trees, white circles searching, hunting. The men had not given up. The shepherd veered sharply, weaving through undergrowth, ears pinned back against the pounding pursuit. His body remembered paths that weren't there, instincts guiding him where his eyes could not. A fallen log blocked the way. He leapt, legs coiled and released, landing heavy but steady, the baby holding fast. The child cried out as the beam of a flashlight swept close, slicing across the shepherd's flank. The men shouted again, their boots tearing close. One raised a hand. A flash of steel caught the light. The shepherd pressed harder, driving himself deeper into the trees. His lungs screamed, each breath a ragged scrape, but his pace did not slow. Every sound from the baby, every cry, every cough, every gasp was few. The river came sudden, wide, dark, rushing, with swollen rainwater. The current hissed like a serpent, fast and merciless. For a heartbeat, he stopped at the bank. Behind him, the men closed in. Ahead, the water stretched endless. The baby whimpered. That was enough. The shepherd stepped forward, into the freezing torrent. The river swallowed his legs at once, the current dragging with brutal force. He pushed further, claws digging against the stone beneath, then lifted into the flow. Water surged around him, pulling, dragging, clawing to rip the weight from his back. The baby cried, sharp, terrified, arms tightening around his neck. The shepherd kicked hard, body cutting across the current, each stroke a battle. His muscles burned, his wounds screamed, but his mind knew only one command: forward. On the far bank, branches reached low, a slope of mud slick with rain. His paws struck stone, scrambled, slid, then found perch. With a heave he dragged himself and the child from the river's grip, collapsing in a heap at the edge. The baby sobbed into his fur. The shepherd turned, licking the child's cheek, tasting salt and river water. The baby's cries softened, eyes closing against exhaustion, small body trembling but alive. Across the river, the lights bobbed in the trees. Shouts carried over the water, frustrated, furious. The current roared between them now, a barrier no pursuit could cross easily. The men's voices faded, swallowed by the river and the night. For the first time, there was silence. The shepherd lay still, chest heaving, water dripping from his coat in heavy streams. The chain around his neck hung broken, clinking softly with each. The baby's tiny hand rested against his muzzle, fingers slack in sleep. Relief came, not as triumph, but as exhaustion. The quiet collapse after terror has burned itself out. Yet beneath it ran something deeper, something fierce. Their bond, tested to breaking, had held. The shepherd closed his eyes, pressing his head close against the child. For tonight, they were safe. For tonight, they had won. But the world beyond the river waited, vast and uncertain. Safety was not yet permanent. Healing had not yet begun. That part of their journey still lay ahead. The forest was damp with the remnants of rain. Morning light crept slowly through the branches, filtering gold across the riverbank, where the shepherd lay with the baby curled against him. The world felt hushed now, emptied of footsteps and shouts, filled only with the steady sounds of water and the fragile rhythm of breath. The shepherd's body was a map of exhaustion, muscles torn, collar wounds raw, paws battered from the flood. Yet his eyes stayed open, amber catching the thin light, watching over the child. Every twitch of leaves, every shift of wind, pulled his ears forward. Even in stillness, vigilance remained. The baby his tiny hand rose from the shepherd's fur, brushing clumsily at his muzzle, leaving faint streaks of dirt across black and brown. The shepherd pressed his nose gently against the hand, the simple act anchoring them both. For the first time since the basement, the child's face softened into something near peace. Time moved differently now. The urgency of survival had passed, but what lay ahead was unknown. They wandered the edge of the forest together, the shepherd guiding with careful steps, the baby clinging when strength allowed, carried when it didn't. Hunger gnawed at both, but the bond carried them further than any meal could. When they reached the clearing, a field split with wild flowers, and the distant outline of houses, the shepherd stopped. His chest rose with a slow, weighted breath. The baby leaned forward, eyes wide at the color, the expanse, the freedom. From across the meadow, voices carried, not harsh, not cruel, but startled, urgent. Figures ran toward them, shapes of people unarmed, reaching not to harm but to help. The shepherd lowered himself, allowing the baby to be seen. The child's cry rose, weak but alive, cutting through the air like a beacon. Hands lifted the baby with trembling care, blankets wrapped around the small body, voices soothing, comforting. The shepherd watched, ears flicking, muscles coiled. But then a hand touched his head, gentle, unthreatening. The scent carried no violence, only relief, gratitude. The baby's hand stretched again, reaching from within the folds of cloth, fingers searching for him. The shepherd moved close, pressing his muzzle against them once more. That touch held longer than any word could. In the days that followed, healing became their shared task. The baby's cries softened into laughter. The shepherd's wounds were cleaned, his body tended, rest returned in fragments, broken but in every moment, they found each other, in the baby's first steps onto the grass, in the shepherd's shadow falling long beside him, in the quiet nights, where they slept not in fear but in peace. Their journey had begun in silence, grown in fear, and survived in fire and water. Now it stretched into something larger, a life not defined by rescue, but by the bond that had made it possible. The shepherd no longer needed a chain to prove his place. The baby no longer needed walls to feel safe. Together they had carried each other through the break, the pursuit, the rescue, and now in the stillness of healing, their bond had become something unshakable, not survival, but love in its truest form. The forest behind them held their shadows, the future before them held their life. The basement was not built for life, its walls wept moisture, streaks of damp spreading like veins through concrete. Rust lined the pipes that cut across the ceiling, and every few seconds a droplet fell, breaking the silence, with a hollow plink against the stone floor. The air was thick, stale, clinging to the lungs. Yet in this place, meant for storage, not survival, two lives had bound themselves together, in ways that neither could have understood, alone. The crib was not new, its paint peeled at the corners, its wooden rails chewed by time and teeth, its mattress thin, but to the baby, it was the boundary of a small world. Within it, he learned shapes and shadows, light and dark, the cadence of footsteps above, and most of all, the presence of the shepherd. The dog lay in his circle of stone, chained to the iron loop hammered into the wall decades before. The chain was not short, but it was never enough. It allowed him to pace a span of floor, to reach the crib, to lower his body, close enough that the baby's hand could stretch through the bars and touch him, but it never allowed him to go further. The shepherd had tested it, lunged against it, strained until his neck burned. It always had. Until then, he learned to live within its length. The baby's world and his world overlapped in that narrow reach between crib and chain. And in that space, their bond lived. Morning was different from night, only because the light shifted. Thin strips of sun slipped through the grimy window near the ceiling, falling in broken beams across the floor. The baby would stir at that light, fists unfurling, face scrunching against the cold. The shepherd always woke first, ears twitching at the sound, nose pressing against the crib's wood before the child even cried. The baby's first noise was rarely a scream. Often, it was a soft murmur, a sound that was neither hunger nor fear, just the acknowledgement of waking. The shepherd would answer by nudging the bars with his nose, the rattle enough to draw the child's attention. Fingers would reach, curling, grasping at fur. That small touch was their morning ritual. The shepherd held still, breath slow, letting the baby's hand explore, tugging fur, pressing against skin, even poking at the tender edge of his ear. He never flinched. The baby's laugh, rare and thin, came only in these moments, breaking the heavy air like sunlight cutting fog. When hunger set in, the baby would cry and eventually footsteps would come from above. Heavy, reluctant. The shepherd never liked those footsteps. He would stand rigid, body between the crib and the stairs, eyes narrowed, watching until food was delivered and the door slammed shut again. Only then would his chest ease. Only then would he curl beside the crib once more. Nights were longer. The baby often woke with sudden cries, small and sharp, filling the basement with echoes. The shepherd would rise immediately, pressing nose to fingers through the bars, rumbling low in his chest until the cries softened. Sometimes the baby would fall back asleep with his hands still gripping fur, as though that connection alone anchored him to safety. The shepherd would stay there unblinking, for hours if needed. The shepherd understood no words spoken in this house, but he understood tones, anger, indifference, the cadence of neglect. He also understood the baby's sounds. A cry for hunger was different from a cry for fear. A whimper meant loneliness. A babble meant calm. The baby, too, was learning. He did not yet know words, but he knew presence. He knew that when the footsteps above shook the floor, the shepherd stiffened, ears forward, body tense. He knew that when his cries drew no answer, the dog's warmth was always there. Slowly, the baby's body learned trust, his heart quieting faster at the touch of a wet nose than at any blanket or toy. There were moments of stillness that defined them more than any chaos. The baby lying in the crib, staring through the bars, eyes locked on Amber. The shepherd lying close, his breathing slow, his gaze never leaving the child. Neither moved, neither needed to. In the silence, their bond thickened like roots beneath soil, unseen, but unbreakable. But peace was never absolute. The world above reminded them daily of its weight. Arguments broke out at night, voices slicing through the floorboards, anger spilling into the basement like smoke. Sometimes the baby startled, body stiffening, cries tearing loose. The shepherd would plant himself at the crib, teeth bared toward the door though no one came. His growls were low, steady, meant not for attack but for reassurance. I hear them, I stand between them and you. There were days when the basement door opened, not for food but for something else. A shove of anger, a thrown bottle, curses spat into the stale air. On those days, the shepherd lunged, chain yanking him back with a choke, body straining to shield the crib. His presence alone was often enough to hold harm at bay, but not always. The baby's cries were louder those nights. The shepherd's chest ached deeper, and yet no matter how the upstairs world pressed against them, it could not unravel what they had built in silence. Weeks passed. The baby grew heavier, stronger, more curious. He pulled himself to standing, gripping the rails, peering over at the dog. His laugh came more often, his eyes brighter. The shepherd followed every stage, watching, waiting, guarding. The bond between them was not of equal. It was guardian and guarded, protector and vulnerable. But beneath that imbalance was something pure, something no neglect or cruelty above could touch. The baby needed safety. The shepherd needed purpose. And together, in the damp silence of the basement, they gave each other both. What neither knew was how fragile that world was. Their lifeline, strong though it felt, was about to be stretched to breaking. The silence they had built would not last. Danger was coming, heavier and closer. And when it arrived, their bond would be tested, not in stillness, but in fire, in fear, in blood. The basement taught patience. Time in that place didn't flow. It collected, pooling heavy in the corners like the hours stretched, until they became indistinguishable. One long thread of dimness, punctuated only by the sounds above or the baby's voice below. The shepherd learned to measure the passing of time by the rhythms of the child, the stirrings at dawn, the restless wails before food, the slow drift into sleep, when exhaustion finally overcame fear. Every morning began the same way, thin light clawing through the narrow window and settling in stripes on the floor. The shepherd would rise before it reached the crib, ears tilted toward the baby's shifting breath. The child's eyes blinked open slowly, adjusting to the half-dark, tiny fists, rubbing at a face still red from the cold. Then came the sound. Not a cry, not yet, but a soft hum that barely carried across the room. The shepherd padded forward, chain dragging. He pressed his nose against the bars, releasing a short huff of warm breath. The baby's head turned instantly, recognition alive in his wide eyes. A small hand extended, clumsy, searching, until fingers brushed fur. The touch anchored them both. The dog leaned close. The baby giggled, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the damp silence. This was their ritual. Before hunger, before footsteps above, before the weight of neglect returned, there was always this brief exchange. It lasted seconds, sometimes minutes, but it carried them through the rest of the day. Feeding was harsher. The door creaked open. Heavy boots descended the stairs. A bowl clattered across the floor, often with water spilling onto stone. A bottle was shoved into the crib without a glance. The shepherd always stood between the man and the child, teeth flashing if the approach lingered too long. Most days that warning was enough. Some days it wasn't. When the door slammed again, the shepherd would return to his place by the crib. He would wait, motionless, until the baby was calm again. Only then would he lower himself to eat. Night was harder. The house above was alive then. Arguments breaking like thunder, glass shattering, laughter sharp as blades. The baby woke often, startled from fragile sleep by the chaos overhead. Each time, the shepherd was there, pressing against the crib, his low growl rumbling steady until the crying soft. Sometimes, when the baby clung to his fur and would not release, the shepherd remained standing for hours, neck bent, body aching, but unmovable. The baby's grip would weaken only when sleep finally returned. Only then did the shepherd rest, lying with his muzzle pressed to the floor beneath the crib, so he could feel the baby's warmth through the slats above. The shepherd dreamed too. In sleep, his paws twitched as though sometimes he whimpered, low and mournful, lost in memories the baby could not share. When those dreams came, the baby often stirred as if sensing the unrest, small fingers reaching blindly through the bars until they brushed fur. Even in dreams, the shepherd calmed at that touch, sighing into stillness again. The baby's dreams were simpler, soft murmurs, coos, sometimes laughter that bloomed in the middle of the night. The shepherd would watch those moments, head tilted, ears flicking at sounds only the child could summon. It was a language of innocence, one that carried no harm, no cruelty, only pure unknowing. Weeks became months. The baby grew stronger, able to pull himself up against the rails, his small body swaying with effort. As he stood, the shepherd rose every time, standing close, steadying him with the press of his body against the baby babbled nonsense sounds into the dim air, eyes alight, as though speaking directly to the shepherd. And though the dog could not answer in words, his gaze did not waver. He listened. He always listened. It was in these small exchanges that the thread between them thickened. The basement remained cruel, the world above indifferent, but within their narrow reach, love thrived, not gentle, not adorned with comforts, but raw, necessary, unshakable. And though neither could have known it, this silent bond would soon become the only weapon they had against the storm that was already gathering. The house above did not sleep the way ordinary houses did. Nights there were jagged, fractured, filled with sounds that carried menace, even when words couldn't be made out. Sometimes it was shouting, sometimes laughter, sometimes only the thunder of boots across the floorboard. To the baby, the noises blurred together into a kind of storm, unpredictable, frightening, endless. To the shepherd, every shift, every vibration, every raised voice was catalogued and weighed. He knew which footsteps meant the door might open. He knew which silence carried danger worse than noise. That night began like many others. The baby had fallen into an uneasy sleep, body curled tight, breath catching every so often, in small whimpers. The shepherd lay curled against the crib, eyes half shut but ears alert, the faint rattle of his chain against the floor marking every subtle movement. The air was heavier than usual, thick with the sour stench of alcohol seeping through cracks in the floorboards. His body stiffened. The first sign was the slam of a cabinet upstairs. Then glass shattered. Then came footsteps. Not the usual stumble. Not the dragging shuffle of neglect. These steps were purposeful, hard. Each strike against the floorboards vibrated through the ceiling, carrying intent. The shepherd rose at once, muscles locking into place, his body angled toward the stairs. His growl was low, almost inaudible, a warning buried deep in his chest. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open. He did not cry yet, but he could sense the children did not need language to know danger. They felt it in the air, in the tension of their protectors, in the way silence stopped feeling safe. The baby's small hands gripped the blanket, knuckles white, gaze darting to the shepherd. The door at the top of the stairs creaked, slowly, deliberate. A long scrape of wood against its frame, the kind of sound that felt stretched on purpose. Then it opened. Light spilled down into the basement. Not warm light, not daylight, but the sharp yellow of a bulb above, cutting harsh lines across the concrete floor. The shepherd stood firm, paws braced wide, fur raised along his back. The chain rattled as he moved to the farthest point he could reach, directly in front of the crib. His eyes glowed in the fractured light, fixed on the shadow descending the stair. The man's figure grew as he stepped down, boots thudding against wood, each step slow enough to feel like a threat. His face was red, jaw tight, movements heavy with the weight of alcohol, and something darker. He muttered under his breath, words slurred but sharp enough to slice the quiet. The baby whimpered now, fear spilling free. The shepherd pressed closer to the crib, lowering his head, ears pinned back, lips curling just enough to bare teeth. His growl filled the space like a low drumbeat, a sound both protective and primal. The man reached the floor. His gaze swept across the basement, lingering on the shepherd first, then sliding toward the crib. His mouth twisted into something between disgust and disdain. He moved forward, slow, each step deliberate. The shepherd lunged. The chain snapped him back mid-leap, the collar cutting deep into his neck, choking off the growl into a strangled snarl. The sound of the chain clanging against the metal loop echoed sharp against the walls. The man laughed, a sound without humor, only malice. He stepped closer to the crib. The baby's cries rose, thin and desperate, small hands clutching the wooden bars as if they could shield him. The shepherd fought against the chain again, claws scraping furrows into the concrete floor, muscles bulging, blood beginning to wet the fur beneath the collar. The man's hand reached into the crib. The shepherd's body convulsed with fury. Another lunge, another choke. His teeth snapped inches from the man's arm. The growl turned into a roar, a sound that made the air itself vibrate. The baby's cry pierced higher, shrill with terror. The man froze for a moment, hands suspended, his eyes narrowed. Then with a curse he pulled back, shoving the crib hard enough that it rattled against the floor. The baby wailed, body thrown sideways into the rain. The shepherd howled, a sound of rage and helplessness, reverberating through the basement. He lunged again, tearing skin at his throat where the collar bit deeper. Blood dripped now, falling in red lines onto the floor. His eyes burned, locked on the man, but the man had already turned. With a muttered curse and the slam of boots on the stairs, he retreated, the door slamming shut with a finality that left the basement in darkness once again. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The baby's sobs filled it, echoing off the walls, each cry cutting deeper into the shepherd's chest than the chain at his throat. He staggered forward, pressing himself against the crib, pushing his muzzle through the bars, until it found the baby's hand. The child's grip latched on, trembling, desperate, but real. The shepherd stood like that, body shaking, blood dripping, but unmoving. He let the child's sobs shake against him, let the grip hold him down into the world they still shared. His own body ached with failure. The chain had held. The man had reached. The baby had been struck. Yet he also knew something else. He had not retreated. He had not broken. He had faced danger with everything he had, even if iron had restrained him. The baby's sobs softened, turning into hiccups, then into shuddered breaths. His fingers remained knotted in fur long after his eyes closed again. The shepherd stayed pressed against him, unblinking, every nerve still alive with tension. Upstairs, silence returned, but silence no longer meant safety. Something had shifted. The fragile world of routine had cracked. The man had reached for the crib. He would do it again. The shepherd knew it in his bones. The chain could not hold forever. Either it would break, or and when it did, everything would change. The basement did not return to its usual rhythm after the door slammed. Something lingered in the air, sharp, bitter, metallic. The shepherd could smell his own blood, faint but constant, a reminder of the chain's bite. It dripped in slow, uneven drops onto the stone floor, each one darkening into a small stain before the cold swallowed it. The baby would not settle. His cries rose and fell in jagged waves, thin throat straining, body trembling even when exhaustion tried to drag him back to sleep. Each time his eyes closed, he startled awake again, sobbing, as if the shadow of the hand still hovered above him. The shepherd paced in the half-circle allowed by his chain, body low, ears sharp to every creak above. His paws clicked against stone in restless patterns. Forward, turn, back, repeat. The collar burned with every movement. Raw skin rubbed against iron. But he did not stop. He circled again and again, gaze fixed on the crib, as if by moving he could keep the child safe. When the baby's cries peaked, the shepherd pressed close once more, lowering his muzzle through the bars. The baby's hands latched on instantly, fingers tightening until they shook. The shepherd held still, breathing slow, letting his warmth flow into the child through the thin barrier of wood. Slowly, the cries weakened into small hiccups, but the grip never loosened. The baby clung as if the dog was the only anchor left in the shifting dark. Hours crawled by. The air grew colder, the bulb above flickering until shadows spread across the walls in uneven patches. Each flicker made the shepherd's eyes flare gold, each shadow pulling his ears forward in suspicion. He did not lie down. He did not rest. His body trembled with fatigue, but the memory of that reaching hand, the shove of the crib, kept him upright. The basement itself seemed changed. The usual damp carried a sharper edge now, a smell of sweat and smoke mixed with the iron tang of blood. The silence was not neutral anymore. It pressed heavy, filled with the threat of footsteps that could return at any moment. The shepherd's growl remained lodged in his chest, low and constant, as though daring the silence to shatter again. The baby shifted at last, into an uneasy sleep, breath shuddering in and out, small body curled tight. One hand still rested against the shepherd's muzzle, limp but connected. The dog held still, refusing to move even an inch, though his legs ached, though the chain dug deeper. His eyes stayed open, unblinking. He understood something then, in the way only animals do, instinct carved from countless generations. The chain was not protection. The basement was not safety. So long as they remained here, danger would come again, and next time, the man would not pull back. The shepherd lifted his head slowly, gaze drifting to the iron loop drilled into the wall. It had always been immovable, always held, but tonight, with the baby's scent of fear still thick in the air, it no longer felt unbreakable. His body tightened, claws scraping stone as he leaned forward, testing the weight, the strength of metal, against muscle. The chain strained, groaned, then snapped him back with a sharp choke. He did not lunge again, not yet. But in that moment, something inside him had already broken free. The decision was made, even if his body had not yet followed. The baby's grip loosened at last, fingers slipping from fur as sleep pulled him under. The shepherd watched, ears flicking once, twice, before he finally lowered himself to the ground. He lay close enough to feel the warmth through the crib's bars, head resting on stone slick with his own blood. His eyes stayed open until the first light of dawn crept through the small window, cutting across the floor in a thin band. The break had not been the man's entrance. It had not even been the shove of the crib. The true break had happened here, in the silence after, in the dog's realization that the basement was no longer a cage to endure, but an enemy to defy. Something had to give, and when it did, everything would change. The morning that followed carried no peace. The house above shifted with unrest, doors slamming, muffled arguments, the crash of furniture overturned. The shepherd stood rigid, body coiled like a spring, every sound stoking the tension in his chest. The baby stirred with each thud, small face tightening, whimpers trembling out of him before sleep dragged him back under. Then came the smoke. It was faint at first, threading thin through the cracks in the ceiling. The shepherd's nose twitched, his eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary damp or dust. The acrid bite of burning wood filled the air, sharp, invasive, carrying with it the instinct of alarm that lived in the marrow of every living thing. His body stiffened, his gaze snapped to the stair. Above them, chaos grew louder, shouts sharper, footsteps frantic, then a crash like glass exploding. The smell thickened, spreading fast. The baby woke with a cry, coughing almost instantly, the thin sound cracking against the stale air. He clutched at the crib's bars, eyes wide, confused. The shepherd pressed his nose against the wood, pushing close to calm him. But his own body trembled with urgency. There was no time left. The chain had held him captive for too long. Now it threatened not only his freedom, but the child's life. The shepherd stepped back, planting his paws wide, his muscles coiled, the fur along his back bristling. He lunged. The chain snapped taut at once, iron digging deep into raw flesh. But he pulled harder, his teeth ground against the pain, a snarl ripping free as his body surged forward again. The bolt in the wall groaned, dust raining down in small clouds. He staggered back, gasping, then lunged again, every fiber of him straining against the restraint. Blood flowed freely now from the torn skin beneath the collar, dripping hot into his fur. The baby cried louder, reaching through the bars, his hand desperate for the dog. The sound spurred him on, another surge, another violent pull. The wall shuddered. Metal shrieked. The shepherd roared, muscles screaming as he threw his entire weight forward. With a final crack, sharp and final, the iron loop tore from the wall. He staggered, nearly falling, chain dragging loose behind him. His chest heaved, blood slick against his neck, but his eyes were alive, burning. Freedom, fragile and raw, was his. He pressed against the crib. The baby's hands latched onto his fur instantly, clinging tight. The shepherd crouched low, positioning himself so the child could cling against his back. Tiny fists knotted into the thick coat at his neck. The weight was light compared to the weight of survival he already carried. He turned toward the stairs. Each step groaned beneath his paws. The wood soft and warped with age. Smoke poured thicker now, seeping down from above, coating his throat with fire. He coughed, a sharp bark that echoed in the narrow stairwell, then pressed forward. The baby coughed too, the small body shaking, and the sound drove the shepherd harder. He pressed through the smoke, eyes narrowed to slits against the sting, ears flicking at every crash above. His muscles ached, but his steps did not falter. The child's grip held steady, fear and trust woven together into strength. At the top of the stairs, the door hung ajar. Light pulsed through, flickering orange against the smoke. Fire. The shepherd pushed through, muzzle nudging the door open. The hallway beyond was chaos. Furniture overturned, glass shattered across the floor, flames licking along the walls and ceiling. The heat struck at once, suffocating, pressing heavy against his body. The baby whimpered, pressing his face into the dog's neck. The shepherd lowered himself, moving quickly but carefully across the wreckage. Shards of glass cut into his paws, but he pressed forward, weaving through the flames. The house groaned around them, beams cracking, smoke curling in choking waves. Every breath felt like knives, but his focus never broke. Voices shouted somewhere deeper inside, angry and panicked. He froze for a moment, ears swiveling. Footsteps pounded closer. He ducked into a side corridor, pressing low against the wall, the baby clinging tight. The chain dragged noisily behind him, and he bit it in his teeth, muffling the sound as best he could. He moved toward the back of the house. There, the scent of air, cool and damp, seeping through cracks in the doorframe. Safety lay beyond it, but so did pursuit. Behind them, a door slammed open. A shout rang out, furious, followed by the sweep of footsteps in their direction. The shepherd's chest tightened. He bolted. He crashed through the back door, wood splintering, glass shattering outward into the night. Cold air struck them like a wave, sharp and clean after the smoke. The baby cried out, startled, frightened, but alive. The shepherd landed hard on the wet earth outside, paws sinking into mud, chain clattering behind him. The night had opened, but the chase had only begun. The forest opened like a throat, swallowing them in shadow. The shepherd ran hard, each stride tearing at the earth, chain clattering against stones and roots behind him. The baby clung tight, face buried in fur, whimpers breaking into coughing fits from the smoke still in his lungs. Every sound of the child's weakness was another jolt of fire in the shepherd's chest, another surge of speed. Behind them, voices erupted, shouts sharp with anger, commands barked through the dark. The sweep of flashlights cut through the trees, beams jerking across branches, darting over trunks. The shepherd veered left, then right, weaving through the undergrowth with an instinct older than memory. His ears caught every movement, every break in branches, every rush of boots against leaves. The ground was uneven, roots clawed from the soil, stones jutted sharp, mud sucked at his paws with every step. More than once he stumbled, body pitching forward under the weight he carried. But always he righted himself, always he pressed on. The baby's grip on his fur never loosened. Tiny fists clenched with a desperation that trusted the shepherd's body to be the world's only steady ground. A beam of light slashed close, catching his flank. The shepherd darted behind a thick oak, body pressed tight against the bark, holding still as voices closed in. His heart hammered so violently that he thought it might shake the child from his back. The baby whimpered, too soft to be heard above the shouting. The shepherd lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against the boy's arm, a silent plea, quiet, just a little longer. The flashlights swept past. The men cursed, scattering wider through the trees. The shepherd waited, 10 seconds, 20 ears flicking at each sound until the noise dulled. Then, with a burst of muscle, he broke from cover and pushed deeper into the wood. The forest thickened, branches clawing at his coat, thorns catching in his fur. The chain dragged like an anchor, snagging against roots and snapping taut against his neck. Each time it caught, he yanked hard, tearing himself free with renewed rage, even as the collar dug deeper into flesh. His neck was slick with blood now, warm against the cold night air, but he did not stop. He could not. The baby coughed again, sharp and wet. The shepherd slowed for a moment, angling his body low to cushion the child against his back, steadying his gait, until the coughing softened. His breath came ragged, chest heaving, but the child's survival was the only measure that mattered. Then, the sound of water. At first it was faint, a hiss beneath the noise of branches snapping underfoot. Then, louder, swelling until it filled the night. The shepherd's ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring at the damp scent. The river, he pushed toward it, muscles straining, until the trees broke open onto a wide bank. The river lay ahead, swollen with rain, its surface white with foam. The current rushed swift and merciless, a serpent of water cutting the forest in two. The shepherd halted at the edge, chest heaving, body trembling. Behind them, shouts drew nearer. Flashlights cut through the trees again, beams bobbing closer, closer. He looked at the water. He looked at the child. The baby's wide eyes stared back, wet with tears, his grip unrelenting. There was no choice. The shepherd stepped forward into the freezing torrent. The first step sank the shepherd's legs to the knee, cold biting straight through flesh and bone. The next step pulled him deeper, current lashing at his body with the force of something alive. By the time his paws left the riverbed, the torrent seized him, dragging him sideways, spinning him into its violence. The baby cried out, a sound half gasp, half wail, clinging with every ounce of strength his tiny body held. His fists tangled in fur, his face pressed into the shepherd's neck as water surged up around him. The shepherd's head jerked above the surface, jaws snapping for air, then plunged again beneath the spray. The current was merciless. It clawed at him, dragging him downstream, spinning him against rocks hidden beneath the foam. His shoulder struck stone with a crack, white fire shooting through his body. His back legs kicked wildly, finding nothing but the rush of water. The chain wrapped once around his hindquarters, tangling, pulling him sideways. He thrashed, teeth bared, ripping himself free with a howl swallowed instantly by the roar of the river. The baby coughed, choking on spray, his tiny chest convulsing. That sound, sharp, fragile, desperate, carved through the shepherd's panic like a blade. He surged upward, breaking the surface, forcing his muzzle above water, so the boy's face rose into the air. The baby sputtered, gasped, then clung tighter still. The shepherd's lungs burned. Each breath was shallow, each kick weaker than the last, but instinct drove him forward. He angled his body, fighting the current, every stroke a battle of muscle against flood. The far bank was distant, a blur of mud and stone, but its scent carried through the water, earth, grass, the promise of ground. He fixed on it. His strokes slowed, his chest seethed, his legs trembled with exhaustion. More than once, the current dragged him under so long that blackness pricked at the edges of his sight. Each time, the baby's fingers tightened in his fur, pulling him back to life. At last, his paws struck mud, slippery, shifting, but solid. He clawed at it, hauling himself forward inch by inch. The bank rose steeply, slick with rain, but he dug in, dragging both their bodies upward. His muscles screamed with each pull, claws tearing through earth, body sagging with the weight of the child and the broken chain that still clattered behind him. One last heave, his front legs collapsed onto flat ground, hauling his body and the baby fully from the river's. They lay sprawled in the mud, water streaming from fur and cloth, lungs heaving in ragged unison. The baby sobbed, weak but alive. The sound was not terror anymore, it was release, a body shaking with relief even in exhaustion. The shepherd turned, pressing his muzzle against the boy's cheek, licking away water and tears alike. The child's hand lifted, trembling, brushing clumsily at his face. Even here, soaked, battered, barely breathing, the bond between them held. Behind them, on the far bank, flashlights bobbed in frustration. Shouts rose, angry but distant. None dared the current. The river had become their shield. The shepherd collapsed fully then, chest flattening against the ground, eyes closing though his ears still twitched at every sound. His body trembled with exhaustion, but his heart beat steady, alive, unbroken. The baby curled against him, small hand gripping his fur one last time before sleep claimed him. For the first time since the chain had shattered, silence felt like safety. The river had given them silence, but silence was not the same as peace. The shepherd lay sprawled in the mud, his chest rising in shallow, ragged breaths. Each inhale rattled, thick with water he had swallowed. Blood still seeped from the raw gash around his neck where the chain had cut deep, mixing with the river water that dripped from his fur. His body trembled under its own weight, muscles spasming from exhaustion. And yet, he did not sleep. His ears stayed pricked, turning at every sound. The river still roared behind them, a ceaseless wall of noise, but beyond it the men shouted faintly, their voices thinned by distance and fury. Flashlight beams darted along the opposite bank, helpless to cross. The shepherd's gaze fixed on them for a long time, unblinking, until they finally began to fade. The men would not follow, not tonight. The baby stirred. A weak cry broke from him, cracked and wet, followed by a fit of coughing. His tiny body shook against the shepherd's soaked fur. The sound pierced deeper than any wound. Summoning strength he did not have, the shepherd rolled his body closer, curling protectively around the child, creating a pocket of warmth in the cold night air. He pressed his muzzle against the boy's cheek, licking once, twice, drawing away river water and salt. The baby quieted almost instantly. His trembling slowed, his small hand reaching out to tangle once more in the shepherd's fur. That grip, though weak, though trembling, steadied the dog more than anything else. He lowered his head to the mud, eyes closing for only a moment, listening to the child's soft, uneven breathing. Time stretched painfully slow. The forest was alive with distant sounds, the screech of an owl, the rustle of leaves stirred by wind, the crack of branches far off where night creatures moved. The shepherd remained still, conserving what little energy remained, his body forming a barrier against the cold. Every so often he lifted his head, scanning the dark nose twitching at each unfamiliar scent. The baby's breathing steadied as sleep took him, though fits of coughing returned every so often. Each time the shepherd shifted, nudging him closer, rumbling low in his chest, reassurance that he was not alone. Dawn came at last. Pale light crept across the horizon, spreading silver through the trees, catching on the damp edges of the meadow ahead. The shepherd blinked against it, eyes dull with fatigue but sharpened by necessity. He rose unsteadily to his feet, legs quivering under the strain, the chain dragging heavy behind him. The baby whimpered at the movement, but did not wake full. The shepherd lowered himself so the boy could remain nestled against his back. With deliberate steps he began to move forward,
The forest broke open into a clearing wide and startling after the suffocating dark of trees. Grass stretched out in wild patches, damp with dew, and beyond it, faint against the morning light, stood the outline of houses. The shepherd stopped, breath catching in his throat. Civilization, people, unknown. He lowered himself to the ground, watching, ears tilted forward. Smoke rose gently from a chimney in the distance. The sound of a door creaking open carried faintly, followed by the muted call of a voice, ordinary, unhurried. It did not carry the same edge as the voices that had haunted the basement. Still, instinct warned caution. He hesitated, gaze flicking between the sleeping child and the village beyond. To return to people was to return to risk, but to remain here was to starve, to wither, to lose the fragile safety they had fought for. The baby coughed again, a harsh sound that shook his small chest. That decided it. The shepherd moved, his legs dragged, his body screamed for rest, but each step carried them closer to the houses. Across the meadow, voices rose again, this time sharper, surprised.
Figures emerged, small at first, then growing clearer as they ran forward. The shepherd froze, lowering his body protectively, muzzle curling in warning. The chain rattled behind him, his fur bristling. But then, he saw the faces. They were not twisted in anger or contempt. Their eyes were wide, mouths open in shock, their movements unarmed. One voice carried above the others. The baby. The shepherd's ears flicked back, his body tensed as the people approached. But he did not move away. The baby stirred at the sound, eyes fluttering open. When he saw the strangers, his small hand reached tighter into the shepherd's fur. The first figure reached them, a woman, her face pale, eyes wet with disbelief. She dropped to her knees in the grass, arms outstretched, but hesitating as she caught the dog's glare. The shepherd bared his teeth once, low and steady, then pressed closer to the child, signaling without words, "He is mine." The baby whimpered, then stretched his hand toward the woman. His voice broke in a sob. That sound undid the shepherd's restraint. He stepped back just enough to let her approach, muzzle never leaving the boy, ready to strike at the slightest threat. She lifted the baby with shaking arms, wrapping him instantly in a blanket pulled from another's grasp. The child cried weakly against her shoulder. But it was not the cry of fear, it was relief. The shepherd pressed forward, muzzle nudging the boy's hand where it stretched back toward him. The child's fingers brushed his nose, a final tether between them. Only then did the shepherd lower his head, body trembling, sinking into the grass. The people crowded now, voices urgent, hands reaching. Some reached toward the shepherd, tentative, cautious. One laid a hand gently on his head. He did not bare his teeth this time. He had nothing left to fight. He closed his eyes. For the first time, relief was real. The baby's cries filled the clearing as the villagers gathered. But the sound was different now. It was not sharp with fear, not hollow with neglect. Carried relief. The raw exhaustion of survival giving way to release. The woman who held him pressed her cheek to his damp hair, rocking gently, whispering nonsense words with a softness the child had never heard before. The shepherd did not move. His body sagged into the grass, fur matted with blood and mud, chain sprawled useless behind him. Every instinct told him to remain between the strangers and the boy, but his strength was spent. All he could do was lift his head weakly, each time the baby reached toward him, answering with the faint brush of his muzzle before dropping back down again. The villagers spoke in hurried tone. Their voices were startled, urgent, full of disbelief at what they were seeing. A baby alive, carried out of the wilderness by a dog chained and bleeding. Words tumbled over one another, questions unanswered, orders shouted. Yet through the chaos, one truth cut clear. They meant no harm. Their eyes stayed wide with concern, hands gentle where they touched, movements careful not to startle the child or the dog. A man stepped forward, kneeling beside the shepherd. His hands hovered, hesitant, before finally reaching to the bloodied collar. The shepherd tensed, a faint growl trembling from his throat. But the man's touch was cautious, his grip sure but not cruel. With a twist of metal, the chain fell free, clattering useless into the grass. The shepherd blinked, stunned by the sudden absence of weight. For the first time in years, his neck was unbound. The baby stirred at the sound, turning in the woman's arms. His small hand reached again for the dog, fingers stretching desperately through the space. The shepherd forced himself upright, staggering forward until his nose pressed once more into the child's palm. The baby's sobs broke into softer cries, then into hiccuped breaths. Soothed by that single touch, they carried the baby toward the village, the group moving quickly, voices weaving urgent plans. The shepherd limped beside them, his gait uneven, each step heavy with pain. Yet he would not be separate. Every time he lagged, the baby fussed, twisting in the woman's arms, until his eyes found the dog again. Only then would he quiet. The path cut through fields still wet with dew. The air smelled of grass, of wood smoke drifting from chimneys, of life not soaked in cruel. The shepherd's nose flared at every new scent, his mind wary but his body too weak to resist. His ears flicked back at each unfamiliar noise, the call of a rooster, the creak of a cartwheel. But his gaze always returned to the boy. When they reached the edge of the village, more figures emerged, gasps, shouts, hands covering mouths in shock. The baby was carried inside at once, into a house warm with firelight, thick with the scent of bread and wool. The shepherd followed, limping, his body filling the doorway like a shadow that would not leave. Inside, they laid the baby on a table cleared in haste. Women gathered around, wrapping him in blankets, wiping soot and river water from his skin. His face relaxed by degrees, color returning, eyelids heavy with exhaustion. The shepherd stood guard just a step away, blood dripping onto the wooden floorboards. A hand touched him again. He turned, teeth flashing, but stilled when he met the man's calm gaze. Slowly, carefully, they pressed cloth against his wounds, cleaning the gash at his neck, binding it with strips of linen. He flinched at each sting, but did not pull away. His eyes never left the child. The baby's cries faded into soft whimpers, then into sleep. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, hands still curled, as though grasping invisible fur. The shepherd lowered himself to the floor, lying at the table's base, his muzzle pressed against the edge so he could smell the boy's warmth. For the first time since the basement, they were not in danger. Relief did not come in a single wave. It came slowly, in breaths that no longer caught in the throat, in the way the baby's sleep remained unbroken, in the stillness of a room free of violence. The shepherd closed his eyes at last, muscles unclenching, ears tilting only faintly at the murmured voices around him. When the boy stirred in his sleep, his hand reached automatically outward. The shepherd pressed his nose against it, as he had done countless times before, and in that simple motion, surrounded by strangers, the bond between them remained the same, unbroken, unyielding, the lifeline that had carried them both out of fire, water, and fear. For the first time, danger was not waiting at the door. For the first time, their bond was not a secret kept in the shadows. It had been seen, understood, and honored. Relief was not just survival, it was recognition. The village became their refuge. Days stretched into weeks, the rhythm of survival giving way to something neither the baby nor the shepherd had known before: stability. The house they were taken into belonged to the woman who first carried the child from the meadow. Her name was spoken often by others, Anna, though the baby could not yet understand words. To him she was simply warmth, the arms that wrapped him, the voice that soothed him with gentle hums, instead of sharp shouts. To the shepherd, she was tolerated. Her presence was never trusted fully, but her scent carried no cruelty, and her hands, though unfamiliar, had healed the boy instead of harming him. The first nights in the house were restless. The baby startled often in his sleep, small cries breaking loose at odd hours. Each time the shepherd was there, muzzle pressing against the blankets, growl low and steady until the boy calmed. Anna would wake too, lighting a candle, rocking the baby in her arms, but it was only when his hand found the dog's fur that his sobs stopped entirely. Anna noticed this quickly. From then on, she made space, allowing the shepherd to curl at the base of the crib she had prepared, chainless, free, watchful. The shepherd himself did not rest easily either. Every creak of the floor, every knock of wind against the shutters, set his body. He paced often, circling the crib in silent patrols, eyes sharp in the flickering firelight. The raw wound at his neck reopened more than once, blood staining the bandages, but he ignored the pain. Only when the baby's breathing deepened into steady sleep did he allow himself to lie down, head resting against the wood of the crib. Days brought healing. The baby's cough softened, his chest no longer rattling with each breath, his cheeks filled with color, his eyes bright. He began to laugh again, not the thin, fleeting sound from the basement, but fuller, rounder, reaching the edges of his voice. The sound carried through the house, startling the shepherd at first, then calming him when he saw the child's joy. The dog's wounds healed slower. His paws remained cracked, his muscles ached from strain, and the scar at his neck throbbed whenever he moved too quickly. But food came regularly now, bowls filled with meat, water clean and plentiful. Hands tended to his injuries, wrapping and unwrapping the bandages with care. He tolerated it, because the baby watched, always reaching down as if to assure him it was safe. In those weeks, their bond shifted. No longer was it only about survival in the shadows of a basement. It became something larger, woven into the fabric of daily life. The baby learned to crawl on the wooden floor, giggling as he pulled himself forward, the shepherd's nose nudging him when he veered too close to danger. When he fell, as babies often do, it was the dog's head he reached for first, burying his face in fur until tears dried. The shepherd, once restless, began to lie with ease beside the hearth. His body relaxed only so long as the child was near. When villagers visited, curiosity bright in their eyes, the dog never let them close to the boy. His growl was low, controlled but absolute, and each time, the baby leaned into him, unafraid, as though knowing his guardian would never let harm through. Yet healing did not erase memory. There were nights when the baby woke screaming, arms thrashing as if pushing away unseen hands. The shepherd was at his side instantly, pressing close, his growl vibrating through the air like a promise. The child clutched him, sobbing until sleep came again. On those nights, Anna would watch quietly, eyes wet, whispering prayers under her breath. The shepherd had memories too. Sometimes he dreamed of the basement, of chains pulling tight, of footsteps descending. His body twitched, teeth snapping at air. The baby, restless in his sleep, often stirred at the same time, small hand finding fur in the dark. The shepherd would sigh, the dream breaking, calm seeping back into his chest. They carried their scars together. The days lengthened into spring, the cold edge of winter softened, and with it, the rhythms of life settled into something steady. For the baby, safety became normal, not a fleeting reprieve, but the fabric of each day. For the shepherd, vigilance never waned, but his body learned to move without the weight of constant fear. At first, the villagers kept their distance. They spoke in hushed tones when the shepherd passed, eyes darting to the scar at his neck, to the way he bristled at unfamiliar hands near the boy. Yet gradually, they understood. The dog was not a beast to be feared, but a sentinel whose loyalty ran deeper than words. Anna was the first he allowed near the child without protest. She would kneel beside the crib, speaking softly, her voice weaving gentle sounds that carried no threat. The shepherd would watch, amber eyes unblinking, but his growl remained silent. When the baby reached for her, cooing, he did not move to block. He had judged her and found her safe. Soon others followed. A neighbor boy, older, shy, would sit near the baby and offer toys carved from wood. The shepherd positioned himself close, body between them, but when the child's laughter spilled into the air, he allowed it. Each encounter was a test. Each time trust widened, inch by inch, but always on his terms. It was in the warmth of late afternoon when it happened. The baby, no longer content to crawl, pulled himself upright using the edge of the table. His legs trembled, his balance unsure. The villagers gasped, Anna covering her mouth in delight. But the shepherd did not move. He watched with steady eyes as the boy wobbled forward, one step, then two, arms stretched out blindly. When the child faltered, nearly toppling, the shepherd surged forward, body braced against his fall. The boy collapsed into fur instead of floor, laughter bubbling from him. His small hands patted the shepherd's back, triumphant in his attempt. The dog lowered his head, pressing it gently into the boy's chest, as if acknowledging the milestone. From that day, the child's steps grew stronger, and always the shepherd was beside him, pacing his wobbling strides, steadying his falls, shadowing his growth with devotion that never wavered. There came a day when Anna, seeing the boys' laughter spill endlessly, led them outside beyond the village field. The meadow stretched wide, painted with wild flowers and warmed by sun. The shepherd's ears flicked forward, his body tense at the openness, but the boy's squeal of joy pulled him forward. For the first time, the dog ran without a chain. He bolted across the field, muscles uncoiling,
legs stretching into long, powerful strides. The boy clapped from Anna's arms, laughter echoing over the grass. The shepherd circled wide, then doubled back, skidding to a halt at the child's feet, pressing his head against the small hand reaching down. The scar at his neck burned, but in that moment, it felt less like a wound and more like proof of what he had broken free, proof of what he had carried forward. Nights grew calmer. The baby, now steadier in sleep, still reached instinctively for fur in the dark. The shepherd always gave it, pressing close, letting the boy's small fingers knot in his coat until morning came. Their bond, once forged in fear, had become the quiet certainty of life itself. They were no longer prisoners, no longer fugitives. They were companions, bound by something larger than survival, by love that had been tested in fire, in water, in blood, and had endured. The villagers often whispered of the night they were found, of the miracle that a chained dog had carried a baby to safety. But for the two of them, it was no miracle. It was simply what had always been true: one life, guarded by another, bound together without word. One evening, as the sun lowered and painted the meadow gold, Anna watched from the porch. The baby toddled unsteadily through the grass, the shepherd pacing at his side, lowering his body to nudge him gently when he tilted too far. The boy's laughter carried on the wind, high and clear. The shepherd's tail swayed slowly, content, his eyes soft but vigilant. They paused together at the edge of the field, the baby's hand resting against the shepherd's scarred neck. For a moment, neither moved. The world around them stilled. No chains, no shouting voices, no just light, just grass, just the bond that had carried them here. It was not survival anymore. It was life. The baby became a child, his steps firm, his laughter loud. The shepherd's muzzle turned grayer, his body slower, but his eyes, those amber embers, never dimmed when they watched the boy. The village remembered the night they appeared, whispered still of fire and river, of how a chained dog saved a child. But for the two who lived it, memory was not a story. It was bone and blood, etched into every heartbeat. The boy grew with the dog as his shadow. He learned to walk with a hand in fur, to run with a tail sweeping the grass ahead, to sleep without fear, because a warm body lay beside him. The shepherd grew old watching the boy's world widen, his own body paying the cost of battles survived. When storms came, the boy reached for him still. When strangers approached, the shepherd rose, slower now but no less certain. Their bond did not weaken with time. It only deepened, tested not by fire now but by years. And one evening, as the sun fell low, the boy, older, stronger, voice steady, whispered into the shepherd's ear the promise the dog had once given him, without words: "I will guard you, as you have guarded me." The circle closed. The lifeline was no longer one protecting the other. It was both, each carrying the other forward, love enduring beyond survival. The years passed like rivers in spring, swift and relentless. What once was a baby swaddled in fear and innocence had grown into a boy with steady legs and curious eyes. His laughter filled the house that had once been only a refuge, spilling into the meadow beyond, and always at his side, though slower now, was the age had come upon the dog like winter creeping into autumn, first in the graying of his muzzle, then in the stiffness of his joints. When mornings were cold, his once powerful strides shortened into careful steps. His ears, once sharp enough to catch the faintest creak of danger, flicked less often now, dulled by time. Yet his eyes remained unchanged, amber, burning steady, always fixed on the boy, as though the years could not erode vigilance. The boy noticed. Children see more than they are told. He saw how the shepherd lay longer by the hearth, how he groaned softly when rising, how his breaths came heavier after short walks across the fields. He began, instinctively, to slow his own steps so the dog could keep pace. He carried water to him without being asked, stroking the scarred neck with small hands that had grown steady. The protector had not ceased being protector, but the boy was learning to return the gift. One evening, as dusk laid long shadows across the meadow, the boy threw a stick as he had done countless times before. Once the shepherd would have leapt with the grace of a stag, bounding through the grass to return it. This time, He ran only a few paces before faltering, legs stiff, chest heaving. He stopped, turning back with an apologetic glance, tail wagging faintly as if ashamed. The boy's heart ached. He ran to the stick himself, returned, and laid it gently at the dog's paw. "It's all right," he whispered, though he did not yet know the weight of words. His tone carried their meaning. He pressed his forehead against the shepherd's, eyes closing. The dog licked his cheek, slow, grateful. That night, the boy dreamed of rivers and chains, though he had never seen them himself. The shepherd twitched beside him, caught in dreams of his own, both bound still by memories neither could voice. The village had grown accustomed to their pair, the boy and his dog. People no longer whispered, no longer stared. They simply nodded when they passed, offering smiles, sometimes bread or apples for the child, scraps of meat for the dog. Yet beneath those gestures lay recognition. Everyone knew the story. Everyone knew what the shepherd had done. And so when trouble stirred at the edges of the forest, wolves seen prowling, lean and hungry, the villagers whispered again. They spoke of keeping children close, of lighting fires at night. The boy heard fragments of it, enough to stir unease. He pressed himself closer to the shepherd that evening, whispering nonsense into his fur. The dog listened, as he always had, but his ears twitched with the strain of age, his body slower to rise. The boy understood something then, in the quiet way children do. Danger might come again, and this time the shepherd might not stand so firmly against it. The thought did not weaken his love. It deepened. He began to watch the world with sharper eyes, listening for sounds in the dark, checking doors and windows as he had once seen the dog do. Without knowing, he was stepping into the role once carried for him. It came without warning. The moon hung low, pale and thin, when a howl split the stillness, not the distant call of a lone animal, but close, sharp, echoed by others. The shepherd rose at once, though his body protested, though his legs trembled. His growl rumbled through the floor, old but not diminished. The boy woke instantly, eyes wide, clutching at the dog's fur. Another howl, then the sound of paws crashing through brush. Wolves, driven close by hunger, their cries slicing through the night. The villagers shouted outside, voices urgent, torches lit. The boy moved to the door, heart pounding, but the shepherd blocked him, body planted firm despite age. His tail rose, ears forward, every inch of him alive again, with the fire of guardianship. For a moment, it was as though the years had fallen away, and the dog who once broke chains and braved rivers stood reborn in his stance. The boy's hand rested on his back. "Steady. I'm here," he whispered, words simple but carrying the promise of reversal. The door rattled as claws scraped against wood. The shepherd lunged, barking with a ferocity that shook the small house. The boy did not cower. He stood beside him, fists clenched, gaze locked. For the first time, they guarded together. The door shuddered again, harder this time, as claws raked deeper. The wolves circled, their growls low, their bodies restless in the night air. Shadows moved just beyond the torchlight outside, weaving like smoke through the brush. The shepherd planted himself square before the door, chest low, teeth bared. His growl was no longer the endless thunder of youth, but it was enough to rattle the boards beneath his paw. The boy stood behind him, one hand gripping the scarred fur along his neck, the other clutching a length of wood he had pulled from the hearth. His small arms trembled, but his stance was firm. The air thickened with waiting. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a crash, one wolf threw itself against the door. The wood splintered, cracking at the frame. The boy flinched, but the shepherd lunged forward, barking so fiercely the sound cracked like fire in the air. The wolf fell back with a yelp, regrouping in the shadow. Another howl rose, answered by two more. They were not giving up. The boy's chest heaved with fear, but his eyes were wide, alert. He remembered nights in the meadow, the shepherd always between him and danger. Now, as the dog's body trembled with age, he understood. It was his turn too. He raised the piece of wood, knuckles white, and stepped forward until he stood almost level with the shepherd. The dog flicked his ears, sensing the movement, and glanced back, amber eyes locked on the boy's face. Steady, resolute. For a moment, There was no child and no animal, only equals, bound in purpose. The shepherd pressed his head against the boy's leg once, brief but certain, before facing the door again. The wolves struck once more. The wood cracked, splinters flying inward, a snout forced through the gap, teeth snapping. The boy swung with all his strength. The wood connected with a sharp crack against bone. The wolf yelped, retreating. The shepherd surged forward, snapping at the gap, his teeth flashing in torchlight. Blood sprayed, hot and quick.
The boy stumbled back, panting, but steadied himself. His body shook, yet he did not drop the makeshift weapon. The shepherd panted, his growl rolling like a drumbeat. Outside, voices rose. Villagers rallying, firelight spreading wider, the clang of metal as men gathered with blades. The wolves circled one last time, snarling, their eyes flashing in the dark. Then, as the torches drew near and the barking thundered on, they broke away, vanishing into the trees with tails low and howls fading. Silence returned, jagged and uneven, broken only by the boy's sharp breaths and the shepherd's heavy panting. The door hung splintered, marked with claws, streaked with blood. The boy dropped the wood at last, his arms aching, his body weak. He collapsed to his knees, pressing his face into the shepherd's fur. Tears spilled freely now, shaking sobs of fear and relief. The shepherd stood over him, though his legs trembled. His body sagged with age, his breaths ragged. But he remained upright, until the boy's sobs softened. Only then did he lower himself to the ground, curling beside the child, pressing his muzzle into his chest. The villagers arrived moments later, torches blazing, voices sharp with alarm. They saw the broken door, the blood, the boy clutching his dog in the ruins of the night's attack. No one moved to separate them. No one spoke loudly. They simply watched, awe in their faces, understanding in their silence. Later, when the danger had passed and the villagers had repaired the door, Anna found them asleep together on the hearthrug. The boy's face was buried in fur, his hand gripping the shepherd's neck. The dog's body curled protectively around him, even in sleep, even as age pulled heavy at his bones. It was then she understood. The shepherd would not have many more years. His body was fading, his strength ebbing, but he would never stop guarding, never stop watching, not until his last breath. And when that moment came, the boy would be ready. The roles had already begun to change. The lifeline had not broken, it had only shifted hands. The night out the wolves left its mark. The door was mended, the claw marks scrubbed away, but the memory could not be erased. The boy still woke sometimes at the echo of howls, his small body stiff with fear. Each time he reached for the shepherd, each time the dog was there, pressing his muzzle into the boy's side, the warmth of his breath anchoring him back to calm. But the shepherd had changed. The battle had taken more from him than years already had. His limp grew heavier, his legs stiffer with each morning. The scar around his neck, once healed, split open again in the scuffle, and now refused to close fully. He slept longer, rose slower, and though his eyes remained fierce, his body betrayed him. The boy noticed. Where once the dog had guarded, now the boy began to stand guard. He fetched water and food, setting it near the hearth where the shepherd lay. He coaxed him up gently when walks were needed, moving slow at his side, and when strangers approached the house, it was the boy who stood tall, shoulders back, the dog pressed close but leaning into him instead of the other way around. One afternoon, Anna watched from the doorway as the boy led the shepherd into the meadow. The dog's pace was halting, his tail wagging weakly, yet his gaze remained locked on the child. The boy stopped often, waiting for him, his hand always brushing the coarse fur as if steadying the dog's step. When they reached the far edge of the meadow, the boy sat down in the grass, the shepherd collapsing beside him. They lay together in silence, the sun warming their backs, the breeze soft across their faces. The boy traced patterns in the dog's fur, speaking softly, words of gratitude, words of promise. The shepherd's eyes half closed, but his ears flicked with each sound, listening still, keeping vigil even as his body failed. It was clear now. The bond had inverted. The lifeline once tethered to the dog's strength was now tied to the boy's devotion, and yet neither resented the shift. It was seamless, natural, as if the roles had always been destined to change. It came quietly. The shepherd lay curled beside the hearth, his breaths shallow, his muzzle heavy against the rug. The boy knelt beside him, small hands stroking the graying fur, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. Though no one had spoken the word, Anna stood in the corner, hands pressed to her mouth, unwilling to break the sanctity of the moment. The dog lifted his head once, slowly, amber eyes locking with the boy's. In them burned the same fire that had guarded him in the basement. Through the fire across the river, against the wolf, age had dimmed the body, but not the devotion. His gaze said, what no words could. I have watched you, I have carried you, I trust you to carry me now. The boy leaned forward, pressing his forehead to the shepherd's. His voice cracked as he whispered, I'll guard you, like you guarded me. The dog sighed, deep and final, his body relaxing fully for the first time in years. His eyes closed, his breath softened, and with the boy's hand still knotted in his fur, the shepherd passed from watchfulness into rest. The boy did not cry out. He sat still, his tears falling quietly, his hand never leaving the dog's side. He understood, even in his young years, that this was not abandonment. It was the fulfillment of a promise. The lifeline had not snapped. It had been placed gently into his hand. From that night forward, he carried the shepherd in every step. He guarded as he had been guarded, lived as he had been saved, and remembered always the bond that had taught him what love meant in its purest form: sacrifice, devotion, and trust without end. Years passed. The boy grew taller, his voice deepening, his steps carrying him farther from the meadow and the house. Yet everywhere he went, he carried the memory of the shepherd. The scar on his neck, where a collar once bit, the amber eyes that never looked away, the warmth that had kept him safe in darkness. One spring morning, a pup followed him home. It was thin, ribs showing, eyes uncertain. The boy crouched low, coaxing it with gentle hands. When it pressed its nose into his palm, something within him stirred. A recognition, a return. He named the pup Ash for the fire he and the shepherd had once outrun. As the pup grew, the boy taught him not with commands, but with patience. The patience he had learned in the basement, the devotion shown to him through every sacrifice. And slowly, Ash began to follow as the shepherd once had, shadowing him through fields, sleeping at his side. At night, when stars burned cold above, the boy would tell stories not to people, but to the dog at his feet, stories of chains broken, rivers crossed, wolves driven back, stories of a bond that had once saved his life. Ash listened, head tilted, as though he understood. Perhaps he did. The lifeline had not ended. It had become something larger, a thread passed from one guardian to the next, binding lives not by blood, but by devotion. And so, in the quiet of the fields, the boy stood taller, the pup beside him, the memory of the shepherd behind him. The story lived on, not in chains, not in fear, but in love repeated through time. The boy was no longer a child. Seasons had rolled across the village in their endless cycle, carrying him from the fragility of infancy into the lean strength of youth. His shoulders had broadened, his hands had calloused from labor, and his steps carried the quiet confidence of one who had already lived through storms most men could not name. Yet in his eyes, the depth of them, the steadiness, there still lingered the child who once clung to fur in the dark. Ash walked at his side now, no longer a pup but a strong, sure-footed hound. His coat was darker than the shepherd's had been, but his gaze carried the same fire, steady and unwavering. Villagers often whispered that Ash was less a new dog than a continuation, as though the spirit of the shepherd had not ended, only chosen a different vessel. The young man never spoke of it that way, but when Ash pressed against his leg at night, when amber eyes caught the light of the fire just so, memory stirred so sharp it felt like breath from the past. The villagers had never forgotten the night he arrived, cradled in a woman's arms, saved by a chained dog, who broke himself free to carry a child to safety. The story was retold often, around fires at the tavern, whispered to children who feared the dark, the baby and the shepherd. Now when the boy-turned-man passed through the village, he was greeted with nods, respect, and sometimes awe. People said he carried something different, as though danger had already tested him and found him unbreakable. They came to him for help with small things,
lifting burdens, guiding lost animals back from the woods, keeping watch when shadows grew too thick. He did not boast. He simply did what was needed. For him, there was no choice. Protection was not an act, it was inheritance. Spring brought storms that year. The river that had once nearly swallowed them both swelled with rain, its banks breaking, currents tearing across fields. Villagers shouted warnings, gathering their children, driving livestock to higher ground. Panic spread faster than the flood itself. The young man stood at the edge of the rising water, Ash at his side. His eyes traced the current, memory flashing, the roar, the cold, the weight of a baby's hand clinging to his fur. He felt his heart seize, then steady. This was no dream. This was another test. A cry cut across the chaos. A child stranded on a cart that had tipped into the current, water rising fast around it. The villagers shouted, helpless, none daring to step into the flood. The young man did not wait. He waded forward, Ash leaping beside him, the river seizing them both with savage force. His muscles burned, his chest locked with the shock of cold, but he pressed on. Ash swam with powerful strokes, teeth bared, eyes fixed on the child ahead. The current dragged hard, spinning them sideways, slamming them into branches and debris. The young man gritted his teeth, kicking with everything in him, until at last his hands closed around the cart. The child clung to him, sobbing, arms tight around his neck. Ash barked once, circling them in the torrent, then surged forward, guiding them back toward the bank. Together, man and dog fought the flood, inch by inch, until strong hands pulled them onto solid ground. The villagers cheered, their voices shaking with relief. The child was safe. The young man collapsed on the mud, Ash pressed against him, both soaked, both trembling, but alive. That night by the fire he sat silent while others praised him. He stared into the flames, his hand resting on Ash's back. What they saw as bravery, he knew as something else. The shepherd had once carried him through water, now he had carried another. The lifeline was not broken, it lived on in action, in sacrifice, in the simple refusal to let another be lost. He was not only the boy who had been saved, he was the man who would save. And Ash was the reminder, the companion, the steady presence, proving that the bond between human and dog was not a single story but a chain unbroken, link after link, through time.